Welcome to the Bella Grace podcast, where we are empowering you to embrace the beautiful grace found in recovering your authentic self. And this season, we are doing that by telling stories of people whose lives have been touched by addiction through their family members. And this week, we have my new friend Jesse on. He is the host of multiple podcasts covering everything from Doctor Who, Babylon 5, Game of Thrones, the music of John Hyatt, and of course, Bruce Springsteen. He lives in the DFW area like me with his lovely bride, Linda. And when he isn't podcasting, he runs a call center as his day gig and spends way too much time watching TV, reading books, and watching the Dallas Cowboys disappoint him. He has seen Bruce 19 times live. That is incredible. And is trying to find a way to see him at least 2 more times this tour. Wow. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm excited, and I can give you an update. I have arranged tickets thanks to the wonderful kindness of my lovely bride. So I'm going to Columbus in September. And then I got an email that was saying that I had airline miles that were going to expire. So I emailed my boss and I said, do I have a deal for you? I will fly we have an office in Lake Havasu, Arizona. And I said, I will fly into Lake Havasu. I said, into Phoenix, no cost to you. I'm just going to use my miles. Only thing you'll be off is the rent a car and the hotel. So I'll fly out Monday, have a hotel Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday, I'll drive back to Phoenix. It just so happens that Bruce Springsteen is playing in Phoenix Thursday night. And then I will pay for my hotel room Thursday night, and then I will fly back Friday. So all you're out is the hotel room and the rent-a-car. And he said, okay, fine, we'll make that happen. So that will give me, if everything, knock on wood, that will put me at 21.
Wow. That's incredible. You are like truly a dedicated fan.
My lovely bride would say I'm obsessive, more than I like to say passionate. But to do a segue, right? We all have our addictions and our obsessions, don't we?
Yes. Yeah, we do. Well, and that's yours.
Yeah, so it really is. And as you guys can see, I am a man of size. So, and when we get to our story, we all have blessings and grace from our childhood, but we also have scars. Even if you were raised in a wonderful, loving family, there's still things that mess you up. Right? Mm-hmm. Because I know that I've done my best, and I know I've messed up my kid. He is obsessed with locking every door, right? Like we have the front door, we have a storm screen door and the door. And so I open up the wood door and I go to hit the storm door and it's locked. And I'm like, we really need an extra lock, but that is, he's done that. And my wife said it's because he watched some show with her about some girl being kidnapped out of her bedroom, and that when he was like 12, and that scarred him. So he's now like 30. He's like 33, and he still has those scars.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like I usually ask my coaching clients to like think back to the first time they felt a certain emotion. The first time they felt like true fear or true shame, because a lot of what you do in your present day is rooted in that first big emotional experience with that emotion. So that was probably the first time he felt like true fear of being kidnapped.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like that. You're very correct. Yes.
Yeah. It's so funny how it's like it is all tied back to something in our childhood. Everything that we do, every decision we make, every action we take, ties back to something that happened in our childhood that wired us to think that way.
It does. And I think so. And we're gonna get into my story in just a minute, but um, I know there are things that I still behave because that's the way my father, my stepfather, and my mother programmed me to train, and my grandparents, to that matter.
Yeah, because it's not just your nuclear family, it's your extended family too. I always say, like, I have 97 first cousins, or 90 something first cousins. And that was back when my grandfather passed away, when we did the last count. And I don't think any of my aunts and uncles have had kids since, so it should be that number. But I always tell people, I'm like, my cousin, influenced me this way, or, this experience, my cousin had this effect on me. And they're like, well, it's your cousin. But for me, my cousins were like my siblings growing up, because my siblings were 5 and 10 years older than me. And so it, even outside of your nuclear family, can have a huge impact on the way you see the world and how you process things.
It really can it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us your story? Let's start
at the
beginning, and let's just dive in.
Yeah. So, and please stop. When you reached out, you said that the theme of this year was people that were affected by addiction, and I had not thought about that till probably 10 or 15 years, maybe, when my sister started being very, very active in Al-Anon. And this is, I won't get too much into it because it's her story, but she found a lot of comfort and a lot of grace, to use that word, with that group. And I did not realize this till I was older, but I was raised in a very strict Baptist home. That it was, we went to church Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings, Wednesday night, and there was no such thing as social drinking in our household, none whatsoever. If you had one drink, you were a bum in a ditch. Back then, you didn't know the word homeless. I was born in 59, so this is talking about the 60s. And I can remember when we lived in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and my dad was in the Army, so we moved around a lot. And I think part of the pressure, my mom was very young when she had me, 19, and they, if you've ever known people that were in the military, the father's gone a lot, and therefore the mother has to be, run things. And then when the father comes home, there can be this unequal, like, okay, I've been making all these decisions while you're gone, and now you come here and you want to put me back in second chair. Well, wait a minute. So my dad had come back from Vietnam, and that was very traumatic as a kid because, I was old enough to realize, I was like 9 or 10, so I was old enough to realize that, going to Vietnam was not a good thing. And so he had come back and very different. But we would have people over at the house when we were living in Kentucky, and they would all bring their guitars and they would sing and they'd laugh and they'd smoke, and sometimes they would bring alcohol. Not very often, but sometimes they would. And I can remember as a kid hearing someone say, "Cotton, why don't you have a drink?" My dad's nickname was Cotton, and because he had real white hair when he was younger. And he said, "Well, because if I start drinking, I won't stop till that bottle's gone. And he goes, well, that must make you an alcoholic. And he goes, well, if that's what I am, that's what I am. So I did not, like, alcohol was bad to me. Like, there was, and because of that, I never experimented with drinking in high school. Because of that, I'm one of the few people that went to high school in the 70s that didn't do pot. People don't believe me, but I'm like, no, it's true. Because I was convinced that you'd have one drink and you would be a ditch and going to hell. Right?
Yeah.
There is do not collect do not collect $200. And so this fear of that, and when you tie in, my mom had incredible anger. You talked about being the first time you're afraid. I cannot remember not being afraid. When even when we're having a great time, you always in the back of your mind, am I going to do something to make her angry and she's going to lose it? Just like that. And so you've got a father who's not drinking, and you have a mother who is incredibly driven, filled with anger issues, made for this very traumatic growing up. And so I chose food as my coping rhythm. I've been someone who's been overweight my whole life. I've been, there. When people talk about addiction, there is this wonderful scene in West Wing where Leo talks about there's a wonderful scene about how can there be enough? He's talking about this, how can you not get enough of this feeling? How can you not do that? And that's how I felt about food. One of my favorite lines is in a movie Danny DeVito did, Other People's Money. He asked the female lead, do you want a donut? And she says, I'm not hungry. And he says, what does being hungry have to do about whether you want a donut? And I just, yes, that's me. I mean, why? It doesn't matter if I'm hungry and I want it. So, and my brother, who is 10 years younger than I, he coped he did embrace alcohol and drugs. And he joined AA, and he stayed sober for a lot of years till he died. He just recently died this year, which is another reason why I wanted to talk to you. And he stayed sober, but in a lot of ways, he didn't work on the things that caused him to drink. He just stopped drinking. And one of the things, Teresa, that would bother me is, if he'd say something that was unkind or, jerkish, I just owe you an amends. Well, no, what you need to do is quit doing this kind of stuff. You don't get this isn't a Catholic church where you get to go and, do penance, and like, okay, do 3 Hail Marys of Our Father and you're good to go.
So he was using that as like a blanket of like, oh, I've made amends. It's okay. Let's move on. Yeah, exactly.
And so what was funny, and we do find it, I love telling this story, is 1980, I'm set up to go out with this lady named Linda, and it's a blind date, and we go out and we see Electric Horseman with Jane Fonda and Robert Redford, and we go to Godfather's Pizza, and she goes to order a beer, and I'm like, yeah, I don't drink. And she was freaked out. Like, Linda was raised Catholic, party girl.
A good Catholic, a good Catholic girl drinks a beer.
Yes, I mean, she would tell you, high school was good. She went to class just to get through, to get Monday through Friday. And she'd never met anyone who didn't drink. And she said, and by the way, we got married in 84. We are still together. So we've made a way to work it out. And we are very happily married. But, at first she's like, I didn't trust you. What's wrong with you that you don't want to drink? And are you going to be judging me because I do drink?
Yeah. And I think that's a sticking point for a lot of couples. People don't understand my relationship sometimes because I drank when I met my husband when we were dating. I quit drinking in 2020. He still drinks and I don't. And people in the recovery world will say, well, it's not healthy for you to be in the house with someone who drinks. And I'm like, his drinking doesn't affect me. Like he is a perfectly fine drunk. Like he gets drunk, he has fun, whatever. It's not like he's being abusive or negative or whatever. And we make it work because I don't judge him. I don't care if other people drink. I don't drink because it's not good for me. If you want to drink and it's good for your life, by all means. And they're like, well, do you think everybody should be sober? And I'm like, I think there's benefits to being sober, but I don't think everybody needs to be sober. I think there are some people who can enjoy a good beer, like your wife, and be perfectly fine. I am like your dad. If I start drinking, I drink until the entire bottle is gone.
And, I kind of think of that also, that if you look at the scientific things, we all should be vegan, right? The world would be better if we were all not eating beef and, animals. But that's not my choice, right? And so I do find it funny sometimes when I had a really good friend that was so opposed to the idea of marijuana becoming legal. They just thought that was the end of civilization. And I looked and I said, but you drink. Well, what's that got to do with it? You understand, if it's legal, it's the same thing as you having a scotch.
Yeah.
The only reason it's not is because it's illegal. And, and they could not understand. I mean, they did not connect that in their mind. And, and I realized that there are plenty of people who can, do edibles and help them go to sleep and they're fine. And there's others that can use, mind altering substances, and it does a bad thing for their lives.
It totally derails them. Yeah. And I find it interesting, like your brother and you grew up in the same environment.
Yeah.
You had the same experiences to some degree, aside from like age differences and, developmental stages. But he turned to drugs and alcohol and you didn't.
Yeah. And like he, like I grew up in a house, both of them were, my mom and dad were both huge smokers. The thought of smoking just disgusts me. And like even a cigar, like that, just to celebrate, is just something I've never wanted to do because the house smelled like it all the time. And while the other hand, and he was very young, he's like, well, I started smoking because it made the high last longer. And I'm like, I don't know if that's a good thing. I don't know if that's a good thing. And so I wonder when I would meet, other people who are starting to smoke young, I'm like, I'd always have that in the back of my mind, like, no, that can't be the only reason they start smoking, right? I mean, there was, but what didn't we, I think you and I've talked about this in our little pre-meeting, right? That there is a judgment from some people about other addictions. Like, oh, you can't do this, as they're sucking on caffeine 24/7 and nicotine 100%, right? Or, or like my mom is addicted to Xanax. I did not know that till this is sad to say, my son's like, yeah, he calls her Mimi. Do you not understand Mimi's high, Dad? What? He's like 19 or 20, and he's like, yeah, that nerve
He's
pills
popping them like candy.
Yeah, those nerve pills are Xanax, Dad. She's high as a kite. She's flying. And I was like, holy shit. To me, it was just she was always taking her nerve pill. So once again, here's the judgment, right? Is she's so anti-alcohol, yet, and oh God, you talk about a horrible moment. She had to go to the hospital for a knee surgery, and it was cleaning up a vein in her leg. It wasn't knee surgery. And every time we saw her, they haven't given me my nerve pill. I need my nerve pill. They haven't seen my nerve pill. I mean, not I'm in pain, not I'm doing, I mean, every time. And last July, my mom had a stroke, and she is currently in a nursing home. And we had to argue with the doctors and like, look, this lady's 78. She's addicted to Xanax. She's taking it 3 times a day. Look, I know you're worried that the government's going to come back and think that you're trying to, keep this person asleep. I'm like, no, just trust me. This farm has, this has gone too fast. You've got to do this. And so we did work that with the doctor, that she was getting it, but she still says, she will say, I need it. I need it.
Yeah.
And,
I need it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure she used that. So did she, well, you may not know, but I wonder if she used it when you guys were younger to try to deal with some of the anger issues that she was feeling.
I don't know. And I do know that by the time she was 30, when she turned 30, we were living in Germany because my dad was stationed over there. She had a son who was 10, a daughter who's 5, and a son who's 1, because we're 5 years apart.
Yeah.
So before 30, 3 kids, a husband who's gone all the time with the military, financial pressures. I can remember us getting, I can remember, because back then you got paid once a month in the Army. And I remember going to the commissary, and they would buy frozen gallons of milk. They would buy milk and freeze it so that later in the month we would have it,
Yeah.
So all that, so I'm sure, all of that was different things that drove her.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's incredible. You guys, like, when we first talked, like, we talked about how you never drank, but every person in your family, from your dad to your little brother, you all coped in a different way with all the things that were going on, because there's a lot of trauma and uncertainty for a child in a military family, because you're always moving. You never really feel like you fit in. There may be some PTSD, especially after your dad got back from Vietnam, in the family, that makes it a very unstable environment. And children can end up with PTSD when they grow up in an unstable home life like that.
Yeah. I tell this not to get sympathy, but just to explain. One of my mom's favorite phrases is, "I would kill you if I could afford to bury you."
Yes.
So
Yes. I laugh because I joke around with my daughter like that, but my daughter and I have a very like twisted
yes,
dark humor relationship.
yes,
But
and I never thought it was anything. I knew she didn't mean it,
yeah.
right? It was just, gallows humor.
Mhm.
But when I told that to some of my friends, their jaw dropped. They're like, "I cannot believe that someone said that." Yeah, and one of the things that I stand by, that we each did our own coping. For example, I'm a sophomore in high school. I get accepted into driver's ed, and I knew driver's ed happened before school, and I knew that my mom would have to get up early, because by the time I was in the third grade, I was getting myself up, getting a bowl of cereal, and walking to the bus stop or walking to school if you're close enough. She would not wake up, and um, and I knew that even if she said she would drive me to school, and she would have complained about it, and she would have been angry about it. So I didn't even bring up driver's ed. And when I was a senior in high school, the coach said, "Hey, JW," because I'm Jesse Wayne Jackson, and so and in the South, I'm one word, Jesse Wayne,
Yep.
And so in
I was
high
about to
school,
say
yeah,
totally southern.
yeah. So, "Hey, JW, we need an extra trainer for the team. And so we'd like you to come, and we're going to teach you. We're going to teach you how to wrap up ankles. We're going to teach you how to do things. You'll also, do the laundry. You're going to be, kind of helping out the team." And I was thrilled, because a lot of my friends were on the high school football team. It was, I could be part. And I remember the first night I stayed really late because there was a lot of towels to wash, and I got them all done. I got them all dried. I got them all folded. And when I got home and I'd had the car, I could drive. My mom said, "Well, I hope you aren't going to be this late every night." And I quit the next day.
Yeah.
It wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth maybe making her mad.
Yeah.
And
so her anger held you back from a lot of
yeah,
things.
it did. And so, my dad and her got divorced. So then my dad started drinking. I believe the only reason he didn't drink was because they were married. And so I can, it I it never negative affected me, but I did see him. I knew I didn't want to be that kind of person. I was that. And then my stepdad, when my mom married a old high school, sweetheart, and I adored Kenneth. He was my stepdad, but routinely, and this was after I moved out of the house, so I'm only hearing this secondhand, but once or twice a year he'd go on a 3-day bender, and just you'd never hear from him. And so even to this day, and I'm 64, the thought of drinking doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah.
Maybe during a Cowboy game I'll have Mike's hard lemonade, but I have no interest in. So my wife and I adore Kentucky and the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. I
Mhm.
recommend everyone, even if you don't drink, it is fabulous. It is there.
Okay.
Think,
We're doing it. We're doing a Ragnar race
yeah,
on the Bourbon Trail in
yes,
October. So
yes.
I'm excited to
It,
hear what you have to say.
yeah, it is absolutely beautiful. Maker's Mark and Woodford Reserve are two of the most beautiful places in the world. To drive to Woodford Reserve, you drive miles of horse ranches with all the white fences and these fields. And you get there, and Woodford Reserve is all these beautiful brick buildings. And for those of you who don't know, um, you pay a very small fee, like less than $10, and they give you a tour of the distillery. And they give you the history of the distillery. They talk about how you make bourbon and all the laws that are there. Bourbon is actually ruled by government law. There, to be called bourbon, you have to hit 4 different things. It has to be at least 51% corn. It has to be within, no additives. You have to put it into a certain proof into a new uh, white oak barrel. You can't use a barrel more than once. I mean, there's all this laws in it. And then you
Wow.
age it, and that's how the bourbon ages. The heat of the distilled liquor in there goes to the wood and comes out, and that's where it gets the color and the flavor is all the wood. So anyway, we go and we tour, and I smell it, maybe put my tongue in it, then give Linda my sample. So unfortunately, Teresa, by the second or third distillery, she's like, I need a burger. I am really messed up right now. Um, the reason Linda is now comfortable with me not drinking is early in our dating, she realized, wait, you're a designated driver all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe this is
Yeah.
a good thing.
Yeah,
So,
that's my husband's favorite part of me not drinking.
yes, yes. And she always says, if you do want to drink, I will be glad to drive you. And I'm like, no, I just have no interest. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Was your brother, so your brother would have been in the house with your stepdad when your stepdad would
Yes.
go on the benders.
Yes, he would. And then my dad moved back to Kentucky because he hated Louisiana. He only moved to Louisiana because that's where my mom wanted to live, because my mom had to be within an hour drive of her parents. She just and
Mhm.
my grandparents owned a dairy farm. My grandfather was a very active in the Baptist church, and he was, very anti-drinking and anti-smoking and no sex before marriage, and just very, very strict household. And so when he moved to Kentucky, my brother moved up there with him, and he talked about that as Dean, which is my brother's name, reached an older age, they would drink together. He said,
Yeah.
Dad was a drinking partner, and when my father died, we talked about that Dean had a different memory of him than I did, because they would drink together. And
Yeah,
that's something that
you had that traditional Baptist dad. And
yeah,
I grew up in the South and I was introduced to the Baptist church when I was in high school. So I know how strict and how
yeah,
rigorous it can be. And, they have very set boundaries and rules against, around certain things. So
yeah.
you had this like totally different experience than your brother did with your dad.
We really did. And so and my brother did find AA, and for the longest time he was stayed angry, Teresa,
Mhm.
very, very angry. And he and I had a very rough relationship. He was very he he really admired me a lot because I didn't drink. And the joke in my family is that Linda and I are weird. We met, we fell in love, we got married, we had a kid, all in that order. None of the rest of my family did it in that way. As Dean joked about, he said in recovery, a third date usually involves a U-Haul. And so, so he was always impressed that, and I was uncomfortable with that. I'm like, I'm nothing, I'm not done anything special, right? This is it. And so, and it was a really powerful day. I had been diagnosed with colon cancer, and he blurted it all over Facebook that, my brother has colon cancer, and, please pray for him. And he was always about drama. And I got really mad. I said, that's not your story to tell, And he said, well, you didn't tell me, and it really hurt me. And I said, well, I didn't feel like talking to you, because every time we fight and we talk, we fight. And so a couple of years later, he was learning how to be a truck driver, a big 18-wheeler driver. And we met on a Sunday. And I remember because it was a Super Bowl Sunday, and neither one of us cared about the game. The Cowboys weren't playing, of course. And so we sat in a Denny's and talked like 5 hours.
Wow.
And he said, I know I've got to change, because if my brother, who may be dying of cancer, doesn't want to talk to me because it depresses him, something's wrong with what I'm doing.
Wow.
And, and I told him, Dean was also very heavy. And he told the story that he was up for a job. He had been unemployed. And he had to pass a physical to get the job. And he went to the physical. And so this was going to be tough, Teresa. I mean, he was easy 400 pounds. Smoked like a chimney. I mean, just not in great health. And so you needed to get the doctor on your side, right? And so when the doctor walks in and says, how you're doing? And Dean said, I was fine. You kept me waiting for 45 minutes. And I said, what were you thinking, Dean? I mean, do you not realize that you're just shooting yourself in the foot?
No. Was he drinking at this point?
No, he was sober. He was sober. Yeah.
Which is even more ironic, because we talked, I think, about him being a dry drunk.
Yes.
During our pre-chat. Yeah. And this is so telling of that, because someone who is sober and has really transformed themselves from the inside out and has done the work and, all the woo-woo stuff, like, you really are a different person, and you care, and you're empathetic, and you have hope for the future, and you want to make sure you get that job. But all he could think about was the fact that this doctor left him waiting for 45 minutes.
Yeah. And he embraced that for the longest time. One of the stories I told at my father's funeral, and this is funny yet not funny. They were at a dinner, and my dad really was happy drinking coffee cold, right? And so the waitress came and filled his coffee without asking. And he said, excuse me, can I get a fresh cup of coffee? She goes, oh, I just gave you, no, can I get another cup of coffee? So she brought a cup of coffee. And he said, he pointed to the new coffee, that's your coffee. You can do whatever you want with that coffee. This is my coffee. Don't touch it. So that's funny, but at the same time, right? Don't you feel for that 19-year-old waitress that's just trying to do her job. And Dean embraced, like, see, I'm just like Pop. I just got this anger issues. And it was this, so to me, it connects the alcoholism with this anger and not wanting to change, not wanting to admit that I need to do better. I am very quick to say I'm sorry if I feel like I've offended someone, and I am very quick to say I may not know what the hell I'm talking about, so I could be wrong, and I want to listen. Dean wasn't that way. So we have this night at the Super Bowl, and it clicked. And he said, I need you to call me on my shit. Apologize if you got to beat me.
No.
And he said, I don't want to do that. And so we really started talking a lot. And he got his license. He ended up loving driving a truck. He just loved it. And he drove all during the pandemic. He was one of the people that kept supplies going. He would drive from Houston to New Orleans to drop off supplies at Costco's and other stuff. So he kept things going. And he and I would talk fairly often. And he called me and he said, I've been diagnosed with cancer. And I said, oh no. And he says, at first I wasn't going to fight it. And I said, well, you have a daughter and you need to talk to her. And he said, well, what do you mean? Why? And I said, Dean, remember when she was 10 and you said you were going to come from Houston for Thanksgiving and you didn't show up till 8:00 at night, and she was staring at that door starting at 4, just praying for you to come in? You can't do this to her again. And he said, you're right. You're right. And so he talked, and one of my best memories is he was in hospice care. We knew it wasn't going to be long. And so I drove down to Houston to see him. And it was a depressing, this wasn't a cheery, like, my mom is in a nursing home, and while it is a nursing home, it smells good, the people are nice. I mean, it is not a great place, but it is a good place. His was horrible. It was just horrible. And he looked horrible. He had lost all his hair. He couldn't eat. And so we talked like 3 hours about nothing important. We talked Babylon 5 and Star Trek and reading comic books and stories about mom and dad and my sister. And he looked and he said, wow, you've been here too long. You need to go. You've still got a long drive to Dallas. And I said, yeah, you're probably right. And so I stood up and he grabbed my hands and he said, this may be the last time we see each other. And I said, no. He said, might be, might not. He said, but if it is, I want you to know that I couldn't have had a better big brother. And I said, I just want you to know I love you. And he told me something that really made a difference is, he says, a lot of people would have been angry, and I would have been another time, that I finally got my shit together. I had a good relationship with my daughter. I'm working in a job I love. I'm doing well. I've got a good relationship with you and sis and mom. And now I get cancer and I'm dying. Why? And he said, but how much worse would it have been if I hadn't gotten everything straight and then I died? Yeah. And I'm crying now. I mean, I hugged him. I got in the car. Bruce Springsteen has a song, I'll See You in My Dreams, which is all about death, and death is not the end, and I'll see you in my dreams. And I just got in the car, put that on repeat, and for the next 30 minutes getting out of Houston, I don't know how I didn't wreck, because I was just bawling.
Yeah. Wow. But it's so true. And this hits especially close to me because I'm going through something similar with my older brother. And it is so true. It is how beautiful that you have that final memory of you guys having a great relationship. He has a great relationship with his daughter. And that's how it ended. Because for so many alcoholics out there, it doesn't end that way. It ends with them alone, with nobody in their room. Nobody wants to have anything to do with them because they've killed every relationship. They've burned every bridge, and they were too proud to mend those relationships. They were too, maybe it's not proud, too ashamed to say, I'm sorry, and truly mean it, and sit down like your brother did with you at that Denny's and just talk.
Yeah. And it is, we talk about this, right? That what causes my wife to be able to have a couple of beers and stop? In fact, we joke that, especially when we were dating, I'd touch her on the knee, and that would be, she'd know, okay, I've had enough. Jesse's telling me I've had enough. Or I know, I really know you don't need that last beer, but I'm going to buy it because you want it, and I will bet you there's a 50% chance you're never going to sip it. And often she didn't, right? And then there's others that one's not enough.
Yeah.
And 100 isn't, 100 isn't enough. And it is, so that's why I love your podcast. I love your coaching program. And I do think that, we talked before you started, right? Beautiful grace. And I do think that too many times we don't want to give grace to those who we don't understand, and we don't know the struggles they're going through. We find humor also every once in a while. And this, my wife's, it will be listening to this, and she will punch me that I'm telling this story. But we were around some friends, and for some reason she wasn't drinking. And when we got in the car, she goes, I don't like being around drunk people. And I looked at her, I'm like, you're telling this to me? And she's like, oh, you don't understand. I'm like, no, right? And they always laugh. My son and Linda have been beautiful with my mom, and they go to Louisiana to visit her, and she can be rough. Like, she can be, even though, as my son Chris said, Mimi wasn't the nicest person before the stroke, so she can be rough. And their reward is the Frosty Factory, which is a drive-through daiquiri shop there in Louisiana. That's their reward, right? And they're like, damn, Dad, you go through that and you don't even get a reward. Is a shrimp po' boy your reward? But it isn't the same. It doesn't take the edge off the way our Frosty Factory does. So
yeah. And what you said, like, we don't want to, or we have a hard time giving people grace that we don't understand. And I think that's kind of the point of this series that I'm doing of people whose lives have been affected by alcoholism, addiction, substance use disorder because of their family members. Because you have such a beautiful story. You could have turned your back on your brother indefinitely, and he could have died, and you guys could have never made amends, never rebuilt that relationship. He could have passed away and never rebuilt his relationship with his daughter. But it not only took him coming to you and trying to build those bridges back, but it also took you being open to that. And you didn't have to be, because he'd hurt you
and
let you down.
Yeah, and I will give a lot of credit to my son Chris, because he started calling his, for some reason, when my sister was pregnant with her first child, Dean started calling the baby Frog. And for some reason, after Katrina was born, they started calling him Uncle Dog. Don't know the story. Probably because his true name is Grover. He was Grover Dean Jackson. So Grover, Rover, they called him Uncle Dog. And so Chris would call Uncle Dog a lot, and they would talk and they'd visit. And he would come and say, you know, your brother adores you. I'm like, oh, get out of here, right? You know, he's like, Dad, I mean, you got to just accept this, right? And so I listened to Chris, and I said, you know, maybe the kid's right. And so I give him a lot of credit to that. That and then, you know, with his prompting, and then Dean and I both working through this, and you know, we would spend 3 hours on the phone, you know, just talking about nothing. And like, you know, and Dean would like, well, okay, one more thing and then I'll let you go. And then like 30 minutes later, all right, now I know I really need to get you go. No, we're good. And so I miss him all the time. And I had someone on the podcast that said that siblings are the forgotten victims of family death. That parents mourn their children, and that is absolutely horrible to think about losing a child. And children lose their parents, and that is still devastating. But no one ever thinks about you're losing a brother or a sister. And you think about, they were your first friends, they were your first partners, and I called my sister Rita and I said, I sometimes feel like it's just you and me going through this. And I said, and I know Dean was loved by his nieces and nephew, you know, Chris, and his daughter is going through her own thing. I said, and I know that all the grandkids and my, you know, are worried about my mom, but you know, in the span of a year, you and I, Rita, our mom had a stroke, is now permanently in a nursing home, and we lost our little brother. And I just at times feel like it's just you and me really going through that. And she said, I absolutely agree that it is. And we, you know, we were close, but we've gotten closer, and just we call and go, I'm just missing Dean today. You know, I'm just missing, you know, him. Because he was one of those people that big on posting crap on Facebook, right? He's one of those. He's the crazy uncle that can't, you know, couldn't stand either political party and would throw stuff out there. And so, yeah.
That's so beautiful. I totally agree. I lost my dad when I was young. Losing a parent is awful. I lost my fiance, my first fiance, 6 weeks before our wedding.
Oh,
That was awful.
yeah.
I lost my best friend to suicide. One of my best friends, like her and I was like you, we moved a lot. And
Yeah.
so I had a different quote unquote best friend every school year.
Sure.
And fifth and sixth grade was one of the few years where I went to the same school 2 years in a row. And I met this girl in fifth grade, and we were friends in sixth grade. We remained friends even though we went to separate junior highs, seventh, eighth. And then sophomore year, she died by suicide. And yeah. And so I've lost countless people. I mean, I don't have any living grandparents anymore. And then in 2020, I lost my stepson, my daughter's half brother. And I helped raise him from when he was little guy. And he was 19 when he passed away. And I told my daughter, I said, of all the people I've lost and all the things, all the times I've had to deal with death, I feel so lost because I can't help you through this one, because I've never lost a sibling, and I can only imagine how hard that is. Like, of all the people I've ever lost, I cannot imagine losing a sibling.
Yeah.
Like, the thought of losing one of my brothers, it shakes me to my core. And my brother and I have a similar story to you and your brother. And we had a scare this past week, and I was sitting in the hospital with him thinking, if this is cancer, I know he's not going to fight it and I'm going to lose him. And that was earth shattering. Like, I was sitting there and just praying and praying, because I can't imagine losing a brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
We got emotional there.
We did.
Yes.
We did. But I think, like, your story is so powerful because you guys have this totally different. When you and I were talking, you were talking about your dad being very strict Baptist, alcohol wasn't allowed in the house. And so I was curious of, like, where this was going to go. But
yeah,
you and your brother went such different ways.
Yeah.
And alcohol kind of broke the two of you up for a long time.
Yes, it did. And this anger, right? This talking to him, just because he was always angry about something, and always the, his, I remember he was telling me that Bruce Springsteen's Downbound Train was his favorite song. And I'm like, that's weird. And I was talking, and one of my best friends said, think about the lyrics. I had a job, I had a girl, I had something going, mister in this world. I got laid off down at the lumber yard. Our love went bad, times got hard. Now I work down at the car wash where all it does is rain. Do you ever feel like you're riding on a downbound train? And everything, he was just, that John Hyatt has a song, Damn This Town, that blames, and he was someone who did that, blamed everyone about it. And then as we got closer, and as we talked and we visited, and I think he did a lot of work. I think that being alone in that truck, listening to books on tape and thinking, I think he did a lot of self-evaluation and serving. And, and I believe that is where, and that does bring me joy, that I think he died knowing that he'd cleaned up his side of the street, as they say, that he had
Mm-hmm.
left, he made sure that he had his work had life insurance, and he made sure it was going to his daughter so that she would be taken care of. And the saddest story to me still is, we don't want to tell Mom that he's gone.
Oh yeah.
And because she's just, we know it would break her heart, because she couldn't be there, and she couldn't. So when I see her, and if she asks about him, we go, well, as far, I talked to him the other day. As far as I know, he's still just driving, hanging in there. And,
Yeah.
And it just, that's what we've chosen to do. Don't know if it's right, don't know if it's wrong, but we think that's the best thing for her.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah. And she'll have a very great surprise waiting for her.
There you go. Absolutely. Yes.
When
absolutely.
she does go. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing your story. I usually end with one last question. So
Sure.
if there is someone out there whose sibling is like your brother and has burned all the bridges and is trying to make amends, what advice would you give them?
I think you can't stop. And I like I said, I give Chris a lot of credit to this, that saying, hey, he's your little brother, Dad, and so you keep trying. You try to find common ground, whether it's hating the Yankees or loving, loving, Star Trek, or reading mystery books, or, find something in there that you have in common, and just be accepting and understand everyone's on a journey. And sometimes, and I certainly don't, you don't want to enable someone who is struggling, right? I mean, I think that you sometimes have to give tough love, but if you see they're trying, meet them more than halfway. It's okay to meet someone more than halfway. Yeah. You are, we talked a little bit about your wonderful husband. It's never 50-50 in a marriage. It's sometimes 90-10. And if you hope that you're not always, the 90% where you're taking everything, it goes back and forth. And so the same thing with friendship. Grace is such a powerful word, and that idea of giving that grace to someone and giving them the chance to know you're there for them will make a difference.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, that if the worst happens and you never do get friends, that you had the door open and tried to do there as much as you can.
Yeah.
That's my general advice.
Yes. Right. Exactly. And I agree. You can't really help someone until they're ready to make the change. And so there is a difference between you making amends and coming to their side of the street when they're still out doing their thing and still drinking and still doing. That's not healthy for you. But when you see that they are trying to make a change,
yes,
sometimes they do need you to come more than halfway, because they may not feel secure enough to come out to the street. So you got to go up on their sidewalk.
Yes, absolutely. That is well said. Well said, my friend.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. I was looking forward to this so much. I told Lynn and Chris, I said, what I love is I don't have to ask the questions.
Yeah. No.
and we're going to get you on Set Lusting Bruce. We're going to talk
Yeah.
about your Tejana music growing up and
Yes.
all that joy. So yes, I would like to, if you don't mind, because I am this obsessed with Springsteen, but I did want to quote. I told you a little bit about a song he was doing, and I'm going to quote a little bit of lyrics, and then I'll let you close. Can't help being a podcast host, right?
It's in our DNA.
I'll see you in my dreams when all our summers have come to an end. I'll see you in my dreams where we'll meet and live and laugh again. I'll see you in my dreams, up around the river bend, for death is not the end, and I'll see you in my dreams.
Beautiful. I think that was the perfect ending to this episode. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Until next week, be well, be kind, and may you find some joy this week.